The candles in Lady Camden's dining hall burned tall and golden, throwing soft light over silver plates and crystal glasses. Laughter drifted across the long table, mixing with the clink of forks and the low hum of polite conversation. It was one of the grandest dinners of the season, and every seat at the table belonged to someone of wealth or title. Except one. Eliza Whitmore sat near the far end of the table, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She wore a simple gray gown, plain compared to the silks and jewels around her. She was not a guest of importance. She was there only because she served as companion to Lady Camden's niece, a quiet young woman who liked having Eliza nearby for comfort and conversation. Eliza was used to being overlooked. She had grown up without wealth, without a title, without the kind of name that opened doors. Her father had been a modest clergyman who died when she was young, leaving her mother to raise her alone. When her mother passed as well, Eliza had been fortunate enough to find a position as a companion, first to an elderly aunt, and now to Lady Camden's niece, Charlotte. She did not mind being invisible most evenings. She preferred it, actually. It meant she could enjoy the warmth of a good meal, the music of conversation, without anyone expecting much of her. In night, though, invisibility would not protect her. The Earl of Rochford sat near the head of the table, his voice loud, his laughter louder. He was a man who enjoyed attention, who filled every room he entered with his presence, whether people wanted it or not. He had a way of making others feel small, so that he might feel large, and tonight, halfway through the second course, his gaze fell on Eliza. "Tell me," he said, his voice carrying easily over the table, "who is our quiet little guest in gray?" Conversation faltered. A few heads turned toward Eliza, who felt her cheeks warm instantly. She kept her eyes on her plate, hoping the moment would pass. It did not. "I don't believe I've had the pleasure," the Earl continued, leaning back in his chair with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Tell me, miss, did you borrow that dress, or is that truly the finest you own?" A ripple of laughter came from a few guests near him, eager to please a man of his rank. Eliza's throat tightened. She had faced small cruelties before, whispered comments, sideways glances, but never anything so direct, so public. "She is my companion," Charlotte said quickly, her voice uncertain. "Miss Whitmore is—" "Ah, a companion," the Earl interrupted, waving a hand as though the word explained everything. "How charming. A woman with no fortune and no name, seated among us as though she belongs. Tell me, Miss Whitmore, what exactly do you contribute to a table such as this, besides taking up a chair that might otherwise seat someone of consequence?" The words landed like a slap. Eliza felt her eyes sting, but she refused to let tears fall in front of this man, in front of all these people who watched with a mixture of discomfort and quiet amusement. She kept her hands still in her lap, her spine straight, though inside she felt as though the floor had opened beneath her chair. No one spoke in her defense. Charlotte looked helplessly toward her aunt, but Lady Camden, though kind, was not a woman who challenged earls at her own table. The silence stretched, heavy and humiliating, broken only by the soft clink of silverware, as guests pretended not to notice, pretended not to hear. Then, from the far end of the table, a chair scraped back. Every head turned. The Duke of Ashworth rose to his feet. He was a man rarely given to public displays, tall, composed, known throughout society for his reserve rather than his temper. He was not someone who often spoke, unless he had something worth saying. His presence alone commanded attention, and the room fell silent the moment he stood. He fixed his gaze on the Earl, and though his voice remained calm, there was something unmistakably firm beneath it, something that made even the Earl's smile falter. "Rochford," the Duke said, "you forget yourself." The Earl blinked, caught off guard. "Ashworth, you were only humiliating a guest at this table for your own amusement," the Duke said, cutting him off. "I have sat here and listened long enough." He paused, letting his words settle over the room before continuing. "This lady is under my protection. Anyone who insults her, insults me." The declaration landed like a thunderclap. Gasps rippled around the table. Eliza's heart pounded so loudly she was certain everyone could hear it. She looked up at the Duke, stunned, uncertain if she had heard him correctly. They had exchanged perhaps a handful of words in the past, Brief greetings at gatherings, nothing more. She could not understand why he would rise for her, why he would risk his own standing to defend a companion of no rank. The Earl's face had gone pale, his earlier smugness replaced with something closer to alarm. He opened his mouth, likely to offer some careless apology, but the Duke was not finished. "You forget," the Duke continued, his voice steady, "that I am well aware of certain debts you have accrued this past year, and certain favors you have quietly sought from me. I have said nothing of them, out of respect for discretion, but if you cannot extend the same courtesy to a guest at this table, I see little reason to extend mine to you any further." The threat, though softly spoken, was unmistakable. Cross Eliza, and answer to Ashworth. The Earl's throat worked as he swallowed, his eyes darting around the table, aware suddenly of how many people had heard every word. My apologies," he managed at last, his voice stiff. "I meant no offense." The Duke did not respond to this. Instead, he turned from the Earl entirely, as though the man no longer warranted his attention, and looked toward Eliza. His expression softened, just slightly, though his posture remained composed. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "would you do me the honor of allowing me to escort you from the table?" Eliza sat frozen for a moment, unsure if her legs would carry her. Every eye in the room was on her now, but this time, the attention did not feel like humiliation. It felt like something else entirely, something she did not yet have words for. She rose slowly, placing her hand in the Duke's offered arm. Together, they walked from the dining hall, leaving behind a table full of guests who would spend the rest of the evening, and likely the rest of the season, whispering about what they had just witnessed. Outside, the night air was cool and quiet, a sharp contrast to the heat and noise of the dining hall. Eliza took a slow breath, steadying herself, still trying to understand what had just happened. "Your Grace," she said finally, "I don't understand. We are practically strangers. Why would you do such a thing?" The Duke was quiet for a moment, considering his answer as though it mattered to him that he say it correctly. "I have watched you for some weeks now," he admitted. "At gatherings, at dinners such as this one, you rarely speak unless spoken to, yet you carry yourself with more dignity than half the guests in that room tonight. I have seen you comfort Miss Charlotte when she was anxious. I have seen you offer kindness to servants that others overlook entirely. I did not plan to say anything tonight, but I could not sit by and watch you humiliated without cause." Eliza felt her throat tighten, though this time not from humiliation, but from something warmer, something she had not expected to feel. She was used to being unseen. To hear that someone had been watching, quietly, and had found her worthy of notice, was almost more than she could process. "Thank you," she said softly. "Truly, I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't stood." "You would have endured it," the Duke said. "You have clearly endured worse, with more grace than most, but you should not have to. Not while I am present to prevent it." They walked a little further along the garden path, the moonlight casting silver light over the hedges. Neither spoke for a while, but the silence was comfortable, not strained. "I imagine," Eliza said eventually, "that word of tonight will spread quickly." "It will," the Duke agreed. "Society enjoys nothing more than a scandal, and a Duke defending a companion at dinner will certainly qualify." "I worry it may cause you trouble," Eliza admitted. "The Earl has powerful friends. Let him complain to whomever he likes," the Duke said, unconcerned. "I have little patience for men who find their amusement in cruelty. If my defense of you causes talk, then let them talk. I would rather be spoken of for standing against unkindness than admired for staying silent." Eliza glanced at him, studying his profile in the moonlight. She had always known him to be respected, admired for his composure and his steady judgment, but she had never imagined him capable of such open conviction, such willingness to risk his reputation for someone with none to speak of. "May I ask," she said carefully, "what happens now? I return to being Miss Charlotte's companion, and you return to your circles, and perhaps in time this evening, becomes simply a story people tell at other dinners." The Duke stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "That is not my intention, Miss Whitmore. I meant what I said inside. You are under my protection, and I do not offer such words lightly, nor do I intend to forget them once this evening ends." Eliza's breath caught. "What are you saying, Your Grace?" "I am saying," he replied, "that I would like to call on you properly, not in secret, not with excuses, but openly, so that all of society understands exactly where you stand and exactly who stands beside you." For a long moment, Eliza could not speak. She had spent so many years accustomed to being overlooked, to accepting whatever small kindnesses came her way, without expecting more, that the idea of a duke courting her, openly and without shame, felt almost impossible to accept. "You understand," she said carefully, "that I bring no fortune, no title, nothing that society would consider suitable for a man in your position." "I understand perfectly," the Duke said, "and I find that I do not care. I have spent years surrounded by men and women who value fortune and title above character, and I have grown tired of it. Tonight, watching you sit with such quiet dignity, while Rockford tried to tear you down, I understood clearly what kind of woman you are. That is worth far more to me than any dowry." Eliza felt tears gather in her eyes, though this time they were not born of humiliation, but of something far gentler, far more overwhelming. She had not expected kindness of this magnitude, had not allowed herself to hope for it. "Then yes," she said softly, "I would welcome your calling on me, Your Grace." The Duke smiled, a rare and genuine expression that softened the composed lines of his face. "Ashworth," he said, "you may call me Ashworth, if we are to know each other properly." "Ashworth," she repeated, testing the name gently. They returned to the house eventually, though the mood among the remaining guests had shifted entirely by the time they reappeared. The Earl had already departed, his humiliation too great to endure the whispers that followed him even as he left. Lady Camden approached Eliza with an apology of her own, ashamed she had not intervened sooner, and Charlotte embraced her with relief. In the weeks that followed, true to his word, the Duke called on Eliza openly. He arrived at Lady Camden's home with proper introductions, invited her to accompany him to gatherings, where once she would have stood quietly in the background, and made certain, at every turn, that society understood his intentions were serious. At first, whispers followed them everywhere. Some questioned the match, wondering why a duke would choose a companion of no fortune when he might have selected any number of wealthy, well-connected women. Others, having witnessed the dinner themselves, understood exactly why, and found themselves quietly rooting for the unlikely pair. Eliza remained cautious for some time, half expecting the arrangement to dissolve, half expecting the Duke to reconsider once the excitement of that evening faded. But he never wavered. He called on her consistently, spoke with her openly about his life, his responsibilities, his hopes, and listened with genuine interest when she shared her own thoughts, something few had bothered to do before. By the time winter settled over the countryside, Eliza Whitmore, the quiet companion once mocked for her plain gray gown, stood beside the Duke of Ashworth as his intended bride. The engagement was announced properly, without secrecy or shame, and though a few in society continued to whisper about the unconventional match, most had come to admire the quiet strength that had first caught the Duke's attention. As for the Earl of Rockford, his reputation never fully recovered from that evening. Few forgot the sight of him humiliated at his own hosting table, silenced by a single declaration from a man he had never expected to challenge him. He remained cautious in his words for years afterward, aware that cruelty, once exposed, rarely goes unanswered. Eliza often thought back on that dinner, on the humiliation she had endured, and the unexpected defense that followed. What had begun as one of the worst moments of her life had become, in time, the beginning of the best. She had learned that dignity was not measured by wealth or title, but by how one carried oneself even in the face of unkindness, and that sometimes, when least expected, someone would rise to stand beside you simply because it was right. And so, on a quiet winter morning, surrounded by close friends, and the family she had come to consider her own, Eliza Whitmore became the Duchess of Ashworth, no longer overlooked, no longer unseen, but standing proudly beside the man who had once declared, without hesitation, that she was under his protection.